Thank you guys for coming today. My name is Riley Miller. I'm with the Chamber of Commerce. I've partnered with the SBDC on being able to get some seminars here in town. This is our third seminar that we've had so far this year and ever. And I'm really looking forward to having Carrie share with us some HR strategies, some retention strategies. Seems like workforce is always a challenge, and so I hope that I hope we can bring some light to some ways that we can do better here in our community. So I'll just go ahead and give you the floor and go from there.
Thanks for coming. So thanks everyone for taking time out. I am well aware it's Chiefs. We're going to talk a little bit about building some strategies for improving employee retention and those kinds of things, and improving your workforce and other strategies you might want to consider regarding benefits and those options. It is always a topic of concern no matter where we're at, but especially since COVID, right? So a little bit about us first, and then we'll just jump right in. So we are the KU Small Business Development Center. There are three of us. Christina, our director, typically does work in this area and has worked with Riley now for a few years, developing economic stability and growth here. And so that's really awesome. She's currently out on maternity leave. She had her first kiddo, but she'll be back at the end of September. So very excited about that. Will Katz is interim director at the moment. He is with us about half the time and also teaches an MBA class at KU, which can do consulting projects for small businesses. So if that tweaks your interest, let us know. And then of course myself, and I've been with this center almost 2 years, 2 years in January. So there are SBDCs throughout the nation. There's over 1,100, and that allows us to be present wherever a business is. So we are divided by geographic areas, and we have 6 counties, which does of course include Franklin. Then we go on up to Douglas and Jefferson, Leavenworth, Atchison, and Donovan. But it doesn't matter. You can reach out to us. If you have a friend in another space, we can definitely either get them connected with their local resource or assist them. Either way, we always are here to help. Our mission is actually what brought me to this organization, which is to help people. And that is exactly what we love to do. And our vision to do that is by growing Kansas one small business at a time. So, how do we do that? We do that with individual free counseling and confidential, of course. So we can do that throughout your business journey, which allows us to be a support not only when people are looking to start up, but also when they're facing growth challenges or even when they're ready to buy or sell a business. Additionally, Will Katz is a certified valuation analyst, which gives you a high-level valuation of whatever you might be purchasing or selling business, to be able to know if you're asking prices in the right range or to even prep for that. If you're thinking about selling your business, try to give yourself at least 3 years. 5 is even better to work on that process to be sure you're at your best selling point. We also provide focused trainings and content, just like today we're doing some content providers for our great partners. And we also make an effort to create referral lists that will allow you to find local resources in your area. So to create those referral lists, typically what we do is we have small business owners that say, hey, we've had several great experiences with this bank, for example, or this graphic designer. So we create a list that then when you engage us and ask us for something like that, we just send it right on over and you're able to see what might best serve your needs. So how do we do this for free? There is a cooperative funding model that exists. It is powered, of course, by the SBA at the federal level, the Small Business Administration. Then it comes down to the state level at the Kansas Department of Commerce. Then we also get funding from what we call our host institutions. So remember, each of us have different areas of coverage. Ours is KU, but that doesn't limit us to only working with folks from KU or in Douglas County. We have 6 counties, right? So, and then our other funders are actually the City of Lawrence and Douglas County. So we do a lot of different types of services. And as you can see here, everything from, like I mentioned, business valuation to creating a business plan to brainstorming to HR, which we're almost ready to talk about. So when you're thinking to yourself, when is the right time to reach out? Any of these are appropriate. maybe you're like, well, I think I'm doing okay, but I'm not sure. We have different data tools that can assist you in analyzing that, making sure you're on the right track. Maybe you are ready to look at your next phase and you're like, I'm going to need to get a loan. I just can't go to the next step without a loan. So let's talk about a business plan, a cash flow, make sure you're ready to support that payment. Who can I work with? All those kinds of things. That's what we do. So, moving on specifically to the topic this evening, which is, of course, the strategies for building a loyal and motivated workforce, along with other benefit strategies. So, the reason I chose this particular graphic is because, this person looks energized, right? They're excited. They are like, let's go out there and conquer the day. And that's what you're looking for, not only from yourself to be able to do to run your business, but you are from your employees too. So that's what's going to really help us figure out the next steps. So did any of you have a chance to look at the back questions yet on the one pager there? Remember, I warned you I was going to ask for interaction. So take a second real quick. Think about a couple of those answers because they're going to influence the next few slides. You don't have to write them down if you don't want to, or if you're like, oh my gosh, I have this perfect answer, feel free to share, but just take a second to think about them. Okay, so if I was to ask the room, what are some common employer concerns right now with the workforce? What would you think of? There's not a lot of people, so y'all get to participate. Promise there's no wrong answers.
Right now, in my where I work, is a lot of people like remote or hybrid work. So that is a big challenge. Some people refuse to be in, or they're no longer interested once they realize that maybe it's hybrid or more days a week in the office and they want to go.
Exactly. Yep.
Childcare.
Kind of full comp package,
Yeah.
childcare insurance, any benefits like that.
Exactly. Demanding a bigger compensation package. Sure. All of those are great. Any others? Ryland, have you heard any?
No, my staff is fantastic.
Okay.
Never had
Okay, well, not yours in particular, but even Ryland mentioned like, hey, when we're understaffed, right, it makes it really hard, right? Because, people are out sick or they had to take family time or whatever it is. It happens, but it can be a strain on a small business, right? So other concerns that maybe we might mention included, of course, flexibility, benefits, absolutely. And like you mentioned, childcare falls under that benefit issue. Some of the other concerns that we often hear is, wow, we are just not seeing the productivity out of our staff is what we used to. And that's really frustrating. And so how can we change that, right? Or they're not willing to come in for under $12 an hour, and this job can hardly support that. So what can we do? So these are all some of the concerns, and I don't know about you, but cell phone use is actually something that comes up. That thing is disruptive, just like for the kids and their education that we hear about, it actually is for the workforce too. Have any of you heard this statistic about how long it takes you to get back on task once you've been disrupted?
Like 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
I wish.
Like
More,
15.
worse than that.
Exactly. Like 15 to 20 minutes it takes for the average person to be able to get back on task after being disrupted. Wow, right? How many disruptions do y'all get in a day? I don't know, the email, the cell phone, right? Kids texting, it's like you gotta try to figure out how to balance all of this. And that's also definitely a concern because every time you're interrupted, you're getting less productive, right? And then that turns into less motivation because you're getting frustrated, not getting stuff done. So all of these are common concerns that we hear. So there's there's many things to consider. There's really 3 phases, right? To understanding how to have better employee retention. It's not just when you actually have hired somebody, although we will talk about that. It's also hiring the right employees. So, you know, when we're thinking about right employees, we're also thinking about a target market. Are any of you, all of you are small business owners or work for a business of some sort, is that correct? So all of you think about target markets, is that right, for your business, for your services, right? So it's actually very similar when you want to hire. And that's not something that we really talk about a lot, but we are now, because the employee workforce is so fragile compared to where we were. You know, there was a time, right, where you could pretty much make a posting, somebody would read it, they'd say, oh yeah, that's close enough to what I want to do, and maybe that's not what I want to get paid, but I'm still going to take the job, right? That's not always the case at this point. So, in order to help eliminate some of that random applications, right? Like you're like, wow, I got 20 applications, that's awesome. Now as you're going through it, you're like, wow, 3 are only possibilities. Like most of these are applying for something, I don't even know if they read my job description. Like this isn't the job I was offering. So we get those mass applications that are happening a lot right now too. So in order to avoid some of it, we have to take time to create a good job description. In that job description, it's not only must have, you know, be able to type so many words per minute, must be proficient in Microsoft, whatever, right? Like there needs to be more description to it than that. So when I say soft skills, like what's something that comes to mind?
Time management, maybe?
Sure.
Attention to detail.
Sure.
Multitasking.
Yeah. Right? Being able to be a team player means something too, right? And so like thinking through these things are part of what you're going to want to do. So we're going to define our job responsibilities. How often have you heard your employees say, well, that wasn't in my job description. I didn't think I'd have to do this, right? We're hearing that a lot, and especially on the high turnover job situations, right? So they're like, yeah, I'll take this job, and then suddenly they don't show one time. Okay, well, one time, all right, we'll try to get past this. Suddenly they don't show 2 times. They're like, what's going on here? And they're like, well, you know, I'm just not that committed to this job, if they even respond, right? So part of it is making sure, hey, you are expected to be here at all your shifts. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. If you're gonna miss, this is our policy, right? Like this is how you have to communicate with me, or else you are actually putting yourself in a space to be unemployed with our organization. These are our expectations. And you have to be willing to enforce them too, even though it can be really tough. Because the sooner you set those boundaries and enforce them, it goes throughout the whole company, right? Like your other employees that keep showing up every time, and they're like, wow, how did this kid get on, right? Or how did this person get hired on at a higher pay rate than I am? And yet they're still not here, right? That's all affecting your company culture, which is why you have to have a good job description so they know and you know how to set those boundaries and keep them accustomed to them. So also you need to think about where those candidates are looking for their opportunity to apply. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then we need to also consider the interview process. So one of the biggest concerns about the interview process, does anybody know what maybe one of the top few are as the employer?
2
Would depend-
days.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it depends on how many people applied, because you'd have to get through the whole.
Right?
whole-
So there has to be, most of our workforce at this point is expecting a reply the same day. Now, it doesn't mean that you're telling them you've got your interview scheduled tomorrow at 1 o'clock, right? But I've got your information, here's the next steps, I will be contacting you next week or whatever it is, and you do, right? Otherwise, when they're mass applying, especially if you have any of those that actually are good candidates for you, they just keep going right on down the line, right? And you lost your chance. If you are very delayed, more than 2 days for sure, They assume you're not interested. On they go. That's super fast, right? I mean, like compared to where HR used to be, that's super fast. So helping to all of us to adjust to that mindset. You need to be sure you have some good questions ready and a scoring tool. So you want to be able to get through that interview, be able to set it aside. Maybe you can't interview the next person for another few days. Put that one aside so that way when you come back, you don't have to guess what it was, that how you decided this person was better than that one, you know, when you get back to the last round of interviews. That efficient hiring process then translates into, okay, I need to have an employee handbook, right? I need to make sure I can file all the paperwork with the state. I need to make sure I have my workers' comp in place, whatever it is, right? All of these processes you need to have ahead of time, not, oh, I hired someone and now I need to do these things. You also need to be sure you have a clear timeline, again, communicated to them. So you're going to be in training for the first 2 weeks, or you're going to be, you know, shadowing me, and then you're going to be working with this person, and this is how it's going to roll. And if it has to be changed, we will, but this is the plan. And that will really help them be more confident about your processes too. That training actually needs to happen. So, you know, we often have lots of trainings we're offered, and when you do that, sometimes it's hard to even ingest all that information, especially when you're new in a role. So while you've probably been doing this or used to do it before you trained the last person, for like, you know, in your sleep you could do all these things, you have to take that mindset back and be like, what is a good training protocol for someone who's not familiar with my company, who's going to need to learn my system? And it's okay that maybe they need an audio option to assist them to get through the training. Maybe they do need to have both written and audio. Maybe they do need to see the training thing twice. And like, even though that feels super inefficient to you, that time invested early on will save you a lot later, right? So think about those things. There's a lot of diverse learning methods, and especially the younger workforces that have been going through school and getting, you know, those modifications they need to help them succeed at school. It's worth, you know, saying, hey, what are some tactics that really help you learn new information? Do you like to see it demonstrated first? Do you like to read about it? Like, what is it that helps you learn best? And you're gonna see more success faster out of those employees. In fact, that point was even highlighted by my son last night. I was like, what is one of your recommendations? He's like, just having patience, because like I learn differently at a different speed than what some of my peers do. But once I know it, I'm really good at it. I was like, perfect, that's exactly right. We all have to keep those kinds of things in mind. So when we're trying to find this right employee, you know, part of this is actually being able to communicate what your business brand is. What is your company culture? Are you fun? Are you very, very focused because it's a highly technical type job? You don't have time to be, you know, distracted and checking out Facebook because you might screw up a $100,000 order, you know, whatever it is. Like, what is our culture? Do we celebrate birthdays? It seems small, but when we're thinking about the ways we're going to try to communicate to our potential employees, they may not know you at all, right? What's going to set you apart? Why work for you, right? You also want to take time to be like, you know, this is going to be really hard for me to fit in my day. Don't you know it? Like right now we're hiring ourselves, right? And it's like, okay, we got to set aside a block of time so we can even interview some people, right? Because otherwise we're just going to keep seeing people. We're going to keep going out in the community and suddenly our schedules don't match. So if you have a whole hiring committee of a few people, you all have to be very intentional and say, you know what, we're all blocking this time. We're not going to schedule during this time. We're telling them we're going to do this and really be there. And then you also need to give them like that little bit of hospitality, right? This is their first impression of getting to interact with you. So offer them a drink, offer them a place to wait, those kinds of things, right? When they come in person, unless you're doing it virtual, right? But still, even when you do virtual, there's ways to convey, hey, I care about this time you're taking too. So one of the tips I found was to utilize social media. And I thought, wait, am I reading the target market for marketing still? But no, in fact, they were suggesting that some of those followers on like your Facebook and then like your post kind of often, they might actually be ideal candidates for your business because they're already interested in what you're doing. And actually they're taking a little bit of investment out of their day to keep up with what you're doing. So there's already some interesting motivation that they're starting to show in there. Really interesting idea. And I'm curious if anybody tries it, that they'll let me know how that goes. So, you need to track, how you're going to be able to track where your applicants are in the process. So if you're hiring, for one position and maybe you have 5, maybe that's not overly taxing to keep track of, oh yeah, I've interviewed this person once and this person still needs to get me this and whatever it is. But if you have several or you have a kind of continual hiring process, you might want to consider, figuring out a software option that makes sense for you. So there's a few different options there that we listed that you might consider, but there's a lot out there. Really, I tried to pick ones that seemed pretty efficient, but also weren't very costly because, we're all about low-cost options whenever we can be, so that's what we looked at. You're also going to want to make sure in that job posting, again, to focus on the company personality, like what is our culture, but also take time to think about where you can post that job at, or share at least, that you're hiring in your local networks, right? So places you're already at. So whether it's at a chamber network event because you already know some of those folks just from interacting, maybe you're telling them, hey, I'm going to be hiring, and you're like, this is the candidate I'm looking for, and they already have some familiarity with you, so they can kind of be that connector to higher quality candidates. Same thing for like your nonprofit work or your volunteer work, right? So maybe you volunteer with, coaching, or maybe you volunteer at church or something, right? Like those folks will already know you, so those are actually good spaces to look for not only candidates, but also kind of get that message out about, hey, help me find high quality people. And it's not costly usually either, right? Finally, if you think about using niche job boards, this can really get you into some different spaces because now you're not just putting it out there on, some of those big job sites. But instead you're taking that intentionality to be like, hey, we're really looking for someone in the artist space, for example, or we're hiring for our cybersecurity position, so I'm going to actually look in the tech space. Or, maybe you're hiring, an assistant manager or manager, and you want to look at LinkedIn and kind of put in some postings there. So there's different types of levels, and if you take time to kind of drill down, you may save yourself a lot of money and also find higher quality candidates. Have any of you used a niche board like that? Yeah? Any success out of it?
LinkedIn.
Good. Yeah, LinkedIn works well for you. Cool. So, everybody knows something happened in 2020 that affected the entire workforce, right? And all of us still in 2024, right? And we're still trying to recover from this. And generally it's known as the great mass exodus, the great resignation of folks leaving jobs and trying to find either new ones or just changing what they're doing altogether. So why are employees leaving?
More pay.
Low pay?
Work-life balance.
Work-life balance. Ryland, any ideas? No?
Aging, like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
No
So,
advancement and
exactly.
limited advancement.
Exactly. Career advancement, right? Or learning opportunities. You guys are right on. I think you could have wrote this part. No, that's exactly what it is. Almost straight down the board. But this is what is going on. It's true. And so if this if these are the reasons people are leaving, we have to take time to address how to adjust it. One, by hiring the right folks in the first place. Because if they know the expectations, they know your company culture, they know that you're able to accommodate whatever it is, or you don't have those benefits and they're coming in and still signing on, then there's less of this happening, right? But now what about when we've already got them here? And suddenly everything's going not so great, right? Like you've been trying, everybody's worked to the bone, maybe everybody's tired, maybe there's been some turnover, but yet some people have stayed. How do we make this happen so that they feel valued and appreciated without also increasing the pay, which means increasing the prices, which means less people wanting to buy, right? All those things. So you still have to sometimes increase prices a little bit. Don't get me wrong, but the first thing, of course, is to consider, is your base pay competitive? And sometimes the answer is actually no, right? Like maybe you haven't been raising your hiring initial pay rate. Maybe it's because you didn't have to before all the time. But if you are going to have to, how are you going to do it, right? So one is, of course, to increase prices. But that's not always the only answer, and we have ways that we can assist you with evaluating that. We can use a cash flow template, which is just an Excel document. It'll allow you to be able to understand where your revenues have been historically and where you're trying to get to. But it also allows you to really kind of sort out all of those expenses to make sure, one, where can I also maybe cut some expenses, right? Maybe I need to source differently for our employee work year because actually if I move over here, I'm going to start saving about 10%. That 10%, wow, now I can actually give a better pay rate not only to my existing employees, but also be able to hire a little bit higher at a competitive wage. So we can do that by analyzing that cash flow. We can also use a tool called Profit Sense. It's a financial benchmarking industry tool. All these things, of course, would be free to you. But we can look at things at like, how close are you to the industry cost of goods sold? Or how much are you paying in rent compared to the percentage that average people pay in rent in your industry? Those kinds of things. You can also think about how to make that happen, that work from home or hybrid model. So did you know that there's been a 90% increase? By 2025, 90% increase in people working either from home or in a hybrid model since 2020. Wow. That's almost unbelievable, you know? So if that's going to be the case, and people are reporting, according to this article, that they are happier being able to do that most of the time, and actually the productivity is going up, what's going to stop us, or how are we going to ever go back away from this option as a model, right? We're really not going to. It's not going to happen. So are you going to incorporate this as a business? Maybe you can't. Maybe you literally have to come to the building to run, the t-shirt press line. Or maybe, you've got customers coming through the door. Somebody's got to run that register, right? But then what can you do to try to find a way to allow a little bit of that? So that kind of leads to the next point, which is flexible scheduling. So what tasks can they do from home that makes sense, that doesn't impact your business significantly, but they could say, let's say 5 hours out of the week, work from home, as long as they do these tasks for you. They could actually do that remote. So maybe that's not 20 hours a week or 40 hours a week at home, but maybe that's enough. Maybe that will help that candidate be able to be much more interested, or the person there, right? Because, like you mentioned, childcare, right? Is there an option to make it where they don't have to pay for full-time childcare? Maybe they can get a part-time slot, right? So your flexibility to say, you know what, these things could happen in the evening. You can come in at, I don't know, let's just say they have elementary kids, right? So typically they're home by like 3:30, elementary kids, right? So let's say you come in at noon You do a couple hours of work, you have that 1 hour break that you can choose to eat your lunch, you can choose to go get the kids and get them settled and grab a snack and be back. And then you're here until, later in the evening, finishing up these tasks that now can be done here versus, that had to be here the whole day. But you saved yourself some childcare dollars for your infant or whatever. Well, that's big dollars. Childcare is kind of expensive, right? You can also think about a compressed work week. This is, of course, very big across the ocean, but it's coming more and more popular in the States. A 4-day work week. We all just experienced it, actually, right? Did you feel more productive this week? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, but you have sick people. So pretend you're full staff, right? So I was like, I don't have time for that. I can't talk to you right now. I gotta work. I don't have time for that. And so actually that did get me through things even faster in some ways so far this week. So maybe it's something to consider when you're trying to get those employees to stay. And they're like, look, we've got to do something different. You got to be a little flexible too. And how can we think about making this work for you? Maybe they can come in Saturday. Maybe somehow that works better for them. What can that do for your business? And of course, encouraging that work-life balance, right? So that's easier said than done, right? All of us put those little cell phones in our pockets and we're like, woo, email, woo, work email, woo, right? And so instead, you have to be the one to say, you know what, I'm not expecting you to answer those work emails after 5 p.m. In fact, I really appreciated that at least 3 days out of the week, you absolutely do not. You can do that when you get in. Why? Because without you helping set that intentionality and saying you value their time outside of work so much that you really don't want them disrupting it, then you're leaving them to that imaginary pressure, right? Oh, maybe I better respond to that. And then remember that disruption rule? They were doing something, cooking dinner, whatever, they get disrupted. Now they gotta answer this email, now they gotta, where was I in dinner? Oh gosh, and then the kids are just, and everybody's unhappy because dinner's delayed or burned or whatever. Not that that's ever happened to me, last night. But, these are the things that you want to think about. Help set that expectation. Really, I don't want to see you having to do an email after work at least 3 days a week. Or you don't have to respond to your cell phone call from me or my text to you. Those you can deal with tomorrow. I'm really not expecting you to answer them. I just need to send it to you so you can deal with it when you get in tomorrow. Help them know that. And of course, consider personal day or even just personal hours that you're not going to dock out of their vacation pay or those kinds of things. There's definitely a lot of emphasis on those kinds of hours. So, I'm going backwards, aren't I? That's cool. Sorry. That's what happens when I flip this thing around. There we go. So, recognizing and rewarding employees, oftentimes this can be really tricky because people are like, oh my gosh, an employee incentive program. Oh, another thing I've got to tackle and manage, right? Or how am I going to afford that, right? So, this should not be the goal to overtax you in order to reward them, because guess what? Then you're going to feel, when you're handing them this reward, some resentment. You're gonna be able to tell, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I heard him say how hard this is for them to track, and wow, this is not worth it to me either. So don't do it if it's but everybody does like a little recognition. So maybe it's one time a year. Maybe it is that bonus system where, hey, we hit these marks. We're going to be able to do a small bonus because that if you're hitting those marks in revenue, you're actually covering those bonuses, right? Or maybe it is just a social recognition. Maybe it is really a posting on Facebook. Maybe it is just when they walk in, everybody says, hey, you've done great today, and everybody on the team does that. Or hey, we noticed how amazing your project was the other day. We all wanted to take time to shout out to you. that verbal recognition in front of others is actually really valuable. Or, Facebook posts, whatever, all of those things, because then, how people share those posts, right? Like over and over and over again. And then suddenly you're creating like this culture where they're like, wow, you work somewhere that actually told you did a great job. And you're like, yeah, I did, right? And, and then all of a sudden that builds even more, and you're not even saying good job anymore. Other people are doing that on your behalf. You can also really think about partnering with local businesses for discounts. Now this one is actually something I really like because I'm all about local businesses, right? So, what if you can talk to a massage therapist and they're like, you know what, I'm willing to donate 1 hour if you pay for 1 hour for your employee. So now suddenly the employee has a 2-hour massage and that's a perk at this point, right? So think about those kinds of things. Or maybe it's like a certificate to an event, or event ticket. Like, maybe there's the antique car show coming up or something, right? And you're like, hey, I'm going to give you a voucher to be able to get in. And that's because I know that you want to spend time with your family or to go do something, or this is of high interest to you. And those aren't big investments necessarily, right? But yet they're very meaningful. So, and it helps our local economy. So, when we're hiring for our culture fit and its value, we actually talked about this at 1 Million Cups this week. It was about value alignment and how that actually leads to increased satisfaction in your job. So, I know that's kind of a little bit deeper, right? But if you think about a time where you've been in a job that you've been working, you've been doing good at it, there's no problem, but suddenly something shifts in the company culture. And either they're asking you to work more hours, not necessarily paying you, or giving you more tasks, right? And not really recognizing that either. Or maybe they're like, the last time they told you good job was you can't even remember when. And you start to feel some of that disconnect, that discontent inside you. That starts building and it never goes away until it's addressed. So if you're not, as an employee, aligned with your company, you get less productive. You actually start saying, oh, I don't like where I work. You start finding ways to miss work, be late to work, get less done, right? So these are all reasons to think about, if they're not behind your mission as a company, they're never going to be the ideal person for your position. So, for me, that is one of the reasons I actually came to this position. Remember at the very beginning I said, our mission is to help more people? That is exactly what I want to do. And almost all the time, almost every week I'd say, people say, wow, I can really tell you like what you do. And I'm like, really? Because I just feel like it's wonderful stuff. I don't feel like this is work all the time. I love what I do. And I don't feel burnt out very often by anything. Even when we are overtaxed, at times. It's like, it's okay. I can't wait to go to work tomorrow. I'm going to help more people. So those are the kinds of things that you're trying to look for. So, we're also going to think about how are you going to take that feedback? So these people that are here, right, already your employees, how are you going to know where you're at with them? So you want to take maybe an employee survey. And if you're going to say it's anonymous, make sure it's anonymous. Don't let them have to wonder, right? But the most important thing is to acknowledge some of that feedback and actually do something about at least one of them. Maybe it's going to take time. Maybe you have to say it's going to be a couple weeks before we can even address this. But I saw it and I agree and we're going to work on it. That's enough, Sometimes you have to adjust the expectations of what everybody's role is, right? Because maybe you had to lose a staff member and you can't hire them. Or maybe, you have a new building you're in and there's different protocols. Sometimes you need to take time to make sure that everybody's on the same page again, and that can be enough to help them feel more confident, like, hey, I'm doing my job. So nobody wants to say that they have time to sit down very often and just like chat with someone, right? Because like you gotta keep working, you gotta get more stuff done. But if you schedule, hey, I'm gonna be available for 2 hours during this time. If anybody wants to come in for a 15-minute chat, I'm available. You can do other things while you're waiting for someone to show up. But even that intentionality of once a quarter, suddenly you feel like maybe they want to hear something from you, right? Not just you coming to them when there's a problem. And then finally, thinking about how you can create that company culture and be sustainable is that having employees get together, maybe you do a cookie contest, maybe you do a potluck, maybe you go to a game together, right? Maybe you go bowling, I don't know, something like that, right? But where you're starting to create that little family type environment is really strong about keeping employees with you, because then they're not looking to leave. They have that connection. Community connection is extremely high on satisfaction rates for why they stay or not, even if they're being asked to do more than what they're supposed to be asked to do. So finally, exit interview. How many people do exit interviews? Right? So when you're thinking about this, you're like, wow, why, right? Like they're leaving. It's not, they're already uninvested in my company. Why am I going to waste time on this? But the reality is they should also be in a spot where they're willing to give you some honest feedback. Because guess what? They're not going to see you tomorrow. And sometimes that honest feedback is actually super enlightening, because not all the time that the people that are collecting these exit interviews or surveys, right, are the people in the middle of the experience. So what you see, just like that Undercover Boss show or whatever, right, like when you're out here, you're doing all your stuff and you have a concept of what's happening, but the person down here doesn't always have that same concept, right? That's not their reality. And is there a reason that their reality needs to be addressed? Like maybe you just don't see it because you're not there. So you want to ask like why they're leaving, of course. What did you actually like about your job? Because that helps you understand what you want to highlight in your job description for the next person. What skills did you think that you were being really utilized for in your role? That also helps you redefine your job description. See how it's all full circle? So when you're thinking about like the work environment, right, and the culture, I know y'all can read all these, so are there any that stand out to you, about one that stands out in that section that you found useful if you've used these, or one what to use?
Did you feel supported by your manager and team?
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, we'd probably work-life balance and be able to make sure those two things are separated often whenever, like you said, taking phone calls and or emails in the evening time, setting those boundaries and realizing that was the reason why.
Right. So like, absolutely, the feeling supported by, if it's not your direct manager, at least someone on your team is also pretty crucial to helping people stay. Because if they feel alone on an island when they're at work and they're there 6, 8, 12 hours a day, it's going to get old fast. So for career development, did you feel you had opportunities for growth, right? That was one of your reasons why people are leaving. So what are some examples of ways you can think of to offer growth opportunities in your space? If you had an employee and they've been with you, let's say they're not leaving yet, but instead they're with you, what's some opportunities you could provide to them to allow them to either grow individually or professionally with skills for your team?
Online, or helping them with courses.
Exactly.
Paying to get their certifications and stuff like that.
Certifications, coursework, absolutely.
Towards their degrees.
Oh yeah, definitely. Any sort of assistance towards tuition to accomplish a degree, wow, right? What if you have a small budget? What's some ideas? Like, let's pretend you only have $400 to spend on career growth and opportunities for your employees for the year, because you know there's only so much money to go around, right? But you want to offer something. What's an idea? Right? So it's hard. It's not always right on the top of our mind, but it doesn't mean it can't be there. Now, like you mentioned, there could be maybe an online course, or maybe there's even free courses, which we'll even talk about a little later. But maybe there's free opportunities, but the problem is they don't even know that they exist, right? Or maybe they don't have time, or maybe they don't have a good internet connection. You know, like taking that time to say, hey, what are you interested in? Let me help you learn more about that. Here's some options. Would you like to take advantage of any of these? Guess what? They're no cost to me except for your time. I'm willing to give you a half hour, an hour, whatever it is, and you can sit down here at the office, do it, give me back some feedback about why that really helped you, whatever it is, you know, and then that's cool. I feel like that's an important part of your journey. So, of course, thinking about compensation and benefits, right? Always, right? But you know, there's a lot of variety of benefits out there. You know, we think about that full package, right? Healthcare, childcare, whatever, right? But that can't always be offered. So think about the other benefits you can offer, you know, if that's maybe pet insurance. You know, pets are pretty important to some folks, and it's really hard to figure out how to pay for pet insurance, but it's even harder to figure out how to pay for the vet bill, right? Management and leadership. So, like, did you have a chance to, you know, or maybe it's more like, was management communicating well with you? That's often a complaint, right? Especially when you have middle managers or several layers. It's like, wow, I swear this person doesn't know what I said, you know, and why that's so important. So taking time to think about those, and of course policies and practices, like, are we really following what we say we're going to do? So really taking time to hear those suggestions for improvement. Again, this is when they're going to be pretty honest with you. Like, hey, if you would have done this, I would have stayed. And maybe it's not what you're going to ever be able to do, but if it is, then maybe you don't lose the next employee, and actually that leads to then retention and not having to hire again, right? And then I really like the one about, would you consider returning to this company in the future? Because I think that's a question that's often overlooked. Like, if they've been there with you and they kind of know some skills and they kind of know the company culture, and if some things could change, whatever they pointed out, like, would they come back? How valuable would it be to have some historical knowledge sometimes, especially in ones that have like skill development or certifications, right? That now you're not trying to pay someone else to go get them. They're actually bringing it back, but because there was some adjustment, now it works for them. So, all the different things that you might need to think about besides what we talked about is having a good employee handbook. And those can be a little bit daunting to create, but everybody probably knows about the great AI tools out there like ChatGPT or, you know, Google Bard or whatever. You know, you can always start there. There's also plenty of templates out there. Probably if you've been employed in the last, 10 years, you've probably had one yourself. You can take bits and pieces out of it to kind of put your own together if you're a small business and never had one. But being able to say, here's your employee handbook, actually gives you a very strong, solid foundation for that employee to know, guess what? There are expectations. This person has it together, right? Even if this is your first employee. Training tools, as we discussed, like what are you going to find to help them get better, or like what training tools exist that you don't have to actually be the one to show them how to do it all, but they can learn online and then they can work with you or whatever, those kinds of things. Neurodiversity inclusion, we hit on it just a little bit earlier, but that's really big, and it's definitely something the younger population, let's just say, is really focused on you being aware of and trying to be inclusive about, right? And so if your company isn't doing that, start figuring out how to if you want to attract that crowd. Even as some of us older folks are going through life and now even seeking out mental health services and those kinds of things, maybe you now know you have anxiety or now you know you have ADHD or whatever, right? Like different things that will allow you to go, okay, well, now I need to adjust these things, and you're being flexible or supporting them in learning how to do those things, time management, executive functioning, whatever, right? That will go a long way. So look into those kinds of options. You know, listening skills seems easy, right? Until you have to slow down and actually try to listen to what that person's trying to tell you. And so when you do that, and when you're so intentional about actually listening instead of coming in with preconceived notions, like how much further will you get in keeping those employees there with you? So think about how you can improve those things. Of course, performance reviews, absolutely critical, not only for them to know what they will be evaluated against, but also to do them, because everybody likes a little feedback, like how can I do better? What am I doing great at? And of course, yourself or managers' education and training. Not everyone gets all that training when they go into business. So whether it's a couple classes or, online classes, or maybe it is a whole program, but think about how you can improve your own. Even coming here, right? Like hopefully you get like a little few tips. So this is us. This is how to contact us. I appreciate your attention. I told you I wouldn't keep you here after 7:01, and as long as that clock's right, I'm still right on time. But I would be happy to answer any questions or hear any suggestions or any thoughts that maybe you've had now that we've talked about all this. That's what I love to do. So please feel free to ask or share some thoughts.
One of the questions I had, Carrie, you talked about exit interviews and their importance. Is that stay the same if you terminate an employee versus them voluntarily quitting?
It can be a little harder, but I think it's still valuable, actually, to go ahead and have them fill out the